I, 32F, am an orphan. I have been told that my mother abandoned me at a fire station when I was just a baby. I don't even know my real birthday and have never met or tried to find out anything about my birth parents. My upbringing has been far from conventional as I grew up without a family, bouncing between various orphanages. However, things changed when I turned 11 years old. A childless couple, named Mr. and Mrs. Williams, BTW, I have made up these names as well as all other names so hopefully no one can find them, had come to our orphanage to look at potential children to adopt. Somehow they selected me and Mrs. Williams seemed very enthusiastic to adopt me. The paperwork took some time, but when things were finalized, I thought my life would change for the better. It was a strange feeling to finally leave an orphanage and go with them to their house. Mr. and Mrs. Williams were quite well off and both of them seemed kind to me, at least in the very beginning. Mrs. Williams was very strict when it came to neatness and would always spank me on my hands if my bedroom was not tidy or if my hair was not properly combed at all times. She would say how she had always had a vision of her daughter being absolutely perfect and I needed to live up to her expectations. Mr. Williams, on the other hand, was a bit odd. He would always come into my room as an accident while I was changing. As an 11-year-old, I believed his lame excuses, but as I started growing up, I noticed it used to happen more and more. It really made me uncomfortable, so I begged them to let me have a door lock. However, Mrs. Williams refused and told me that everyone's bedroom needs to stay open and accessible at all times. I tried to tell her about Mr. Williams opening the door randomly and she brushed it off, saying I was just making excuses about her husband so I could have my way. One night, I suddenly woke up feeling really thirsty, but as I opened my eyes, I noticed Mr. Williams standing in my doorway staring at me. I screamed in fear and he ran out in a panic. My scream must have woken up Mrs. Williams because she came into my room running, and this is when I told her that her husband had been watching me. I guess my panic expression might have convinced her because she looked furious and went downstairs to talk to her husband, who was pretending to watch a football game like he usually does. The next day, she called one of her neighbors to help put up a door lock in my room, and for the first time, in a long time, I felt safe. However, she did make me promise to only keep the door locked at night or while I was changing during the daytime, which I happily agreed to. As a child, it was quite difficult for me to understand the deal with Mr. Williams because you have to understand that no one ever taught me that what he was doing was disgusting. All I knew was how it made me feel. I wish I could write that he learned his lesson and changed for the better, but he didn't. Although he could now no longer barge into my room during my vulnerable times, he would ask me uncomfortable questions whenever Mrs. Williams was not around. A woman's intuition is never wrong, and I learned to trust my gut. Hence, whenever Mrs. Williams went out for grocery shopping, I would lock myself inside my room or find an excuse to go outside and spend time with other children in my neighborhood. I guess spending time with other people of my own age group made me realize just how better their life was than mine. They had dads who they could just run to for comfort and they didn't make them uncomfortable. They had moms who constantly kept checking in on them and brought them snacks or water. Although I knew that I needed to feel grateful that Mr. and Mrs. Williams adopted me and gave me a much better life than the one I had in my orphanage, I still wished every day that I could get love and comfort like other children did so easily. I guess this is why as I grew up, I got involved with the wrong crowd in school. I was so focused on being accepted by other people that I didn't care much about my reputation. This is how I got involved with drug addicts and meth heads who thought skipping school and not doing homework was fun. I wish I could go back and smack myself on the head, but I guess everything happens for a reason. I would regularly skip classes, get involved with alcohol and drugs, and dress up like a goth to school. Mr. and Mrs. Williams would threaten to kick me out, but I was too rebellious to even care, and we had huge fights for this very reason. Mr. Williams would also be very weird when it came to anyone I was dating. He would glare at them if they ever came to pick me up for dates and would stay up until I came back home. He would also shout at me if I went out in a dress, telling me how I was dressing up like a tease and that I needed to change into what he deemed was more appropriate. He would also have an issue with my long hair and would comment creepy things like how my open hair could excite a boy, so I needed to tie it up in a ponytail. At first, I would keep quiet whenever he commented something like this, but it slowly started to irritate me more and more. I guess this also made me drink more so I could forget how unsafe and uncomfortable I felt in their house. It wasn't until one night when I was coming back from a party after partying all night in the wee hours of the morning that I stood on a bridge and watched the most beautiful sunrise that I had ever seen. I don't know what it was, but it just made me cry and cry. I know this doesn't sound like a dramatic moment, but I understood then that the reason I was being so rebellious is because I hated my life and I hated everyone and everything in it. If I kept going down this path, then I would one day end up dead like the other alcoholics and meth heads in my town. I knew then that I needed to do something about it. I needed to escape from this town and these people. I can't say that a change happened overnight, but I did stop partying and put my head down and studied. I did lose a lot of friends, but at least my grades improved. Mr. and Mrs. Williams were happy seeing a positive change in me, but I knew I wasn't doing it for them. I was doing this for me. When I finally graduated high school, it felt like I had finally crossed a huge obstacle in my life. Although my grades were not Stanford worthy, they were still good enough for me to join a decent college. However, This is when Mr. and Mrs. Williams showed their true colors. They refused to let me apply to any college out of town. I was shocked since they were the ones who had been pushing me to improve my grades. During our fight, Mrs. Williams confessed that the reason they had even thought about adopting someone like me was so that I could feel grateful to them all my life and spend the rest of my days taking care of them. Mr. Williams agreed and went on to say how children are supposed to be built-in caretakers, and this is the least I could do to repay back all the years of money and energy they spent on me. I was speechless after hearing their words. Mrs. Williams didn't just stop there. She went on to say how she had worked so hard and kept me safe from her husband all these years so that I would not find an excuse to just up and leave. She screamed that she made sure to make me docile and disciplined and that she would not allow me to repay all these years of hard work this way. They even threatened to tear up my high school diploma and burn all my clothes so I would have nothing to take with me and nowhere to go. As you can probably imagine, I was absolutely terrified. If I already had a strong desire to leave before, after that conversation, my determination only grew stronger. In the dead of night, I quietly gathered all my important documents and some clothes, and I made my escape through the window without making a sound. The only thing I left behind was a letter on my bed, warning them that if they ever tried to come after me or involve the police, I would make sure Mr. Williams ended up in jail for all the inappropriate things he'd done to me throughout my life. I made it clear that I wouldn't hesitate to share my story with everyone. I didn't have a specific destination in mind, but I had enough money for a bus ticket, and at 18 years old, I knew that I was finally free from my adopted family. I had a friend named Lorraine who had moved to a nearby town, but we had managed to stay in touch over the years. I decided that her place was the only place I could go to at least until I could come up with a new plan. When I showed up on her doorstep in the early hours of the morning, looking disheveled with my bag, I must have definitely appeared like a runaway, which I was. However, Lorraine and her parents warmly welcomed me inside. She was so excited to see me and could not stop hugging me. Her parents did ask me some questions here and there, seeing all my clothes, and I answered them as truthfully as possible. I guess they must have realized that I had run away from home, but they didn't push me much to tell them everything. I asked them if I could stay with them for the next few days and they readily agreed. I felt so safe and comfortable at her place. While I stayed with Lorraine in her room, I worked hard to apply to various colleges, trying to focus on building a brighter future. Every day in the morning, she and I would apply for colleges and write our essays. Then in the evening, she would take me out to meet her friends in town. We would hike or swim in lakes, and I felt like I could finally breathe in my life. I did wonder how her parents let me stay with them for those months while I applied for colleges, and it wasn't until years later that Lorraine confided in me, revealing that everyone in my hometown already knew about Mr. Williams being a pervert. She told me how he had a record, which I was shocked to learn since I had no idea. However, it did explain why her parents didn't probe too deeply when I showed up on their doorstep that morning. This is why I will always be immensely grateful to Lorraine and her parents for their compassion and for providing me with a safe haven when I needed it most. They truly saved my life that summer. I guess my farewell letter to Mr. and Mrs. Williams must have worked, because they have never bothered to contact me all my life since I left. Lorraine and I ended up getting into the same college, so her parents helped us move into our dorm room. I was so glad to see that I had my own bed and desk which I could decorate as I wished. It was during my college years that I met the love of my life, James. Our connection was undeniable from the very beginning. He was the sweetest guy I had ever met. Talking with him made me feel like I had butterflies in my stomach. We initially became friends until one night, when we met out to watch a movie. When he dropped me back to my dorm, he kissed me out of nowhere and we laughed. We stayed out all night just chatting away, and it is still one of my favorite memories. James knew all about my past and never judged me for it. He was furious about how perverted my adopted family was, but was glad that I had cut off all contact with them altogether. He also told me about his family. His mother, Martha, was a single mother for a long time before she met her current husband. Martha had lost her first husband, who was James' father, to a car accident when James was quite young. He told me about how much he loved and respected his mother as he saw her struggle to pay their bills and make sure that he got a good education. I understood his adoration, as I was in awe as well with how strong she was after losing her husband and raising their son all on her own. James told me how when he was in high school, Martha finally met Dean, who she would go on to marry, and he was James' stepdad. According to him, they had a good relationship, and overall his family life seemed much better than mine. When James and I started to get more serious, he made the decision to take the next big step and introduce me to his mother. Despite visiting the university regularly to see him, she had never had the chance to meet me. So, he arranged for us to have dinner at a restaurant near our university, giving me the opportunity to officially meet her. During dinner, I couldn't help but notice that Martha didn't seem too thrilled to meet me. She bombarded me with questions throughout the evening, particularly questions about my family background and childhood. To be honest, I shared with her my experiences of living in different orphanages before being adopted by Mr. and Mrs. Williams. Her lips visibly pursed in disappointment as I told her my story. It was evident that she was not pleased. I attempted to steer the conversation away several times by asking her about how she was doing in her work, but Martha insisted that I should reveal everything about my past since she didn't want to be surprised later. She also persisted in making comments about how she never imagined her son would date an orphan, or how James could do much better. Her words cut deep, leaving me feeling uncomfortable and unwelcome. James looked pissed as well and told her several times that her comments were really inappropriate and unfair, but Martha would chime back saying how she only had his best interest at heart and that mommy knows you best. It's safe to say that I was totally weirded out after meeting her. However, I never grew up in a normal family, so I thought that maybe this was normal for parents to be this protective about their children. I understood that her intentions were positive and she was just trying to look out for her son. James apologized to me after that dinner and told me that he would talk to his mother about her behavior. Martha and I did meet a few times after that incident and she tried her best to comment a lot less about my background. Unlike her, Dean, her husband, was really sweet and was always polite to me whenever we met. Despite his mother's disapproval, James and I kept going strong and we both knew we wanted to spend the rest of our lives together. Hence, when we graduated from college, it wasn't really a surprise to me or any of our friends when James proposed to me. We both had secured excellent jobs and were moving to San Francisco together where we would be starting our new lives. However, Martha was shocked, to say the least, and showed her displeasure throughout our engagement party, which we threw for our close friends and James' relatives to attend before our big move to California. While everyone else enjoyed themselves, she stuck out like a sore thumb. At one point, when we were alone, she couldn't contain her shock and disdain, expressing to me privately about how she never imagined her son would end up with someone like me and insinuating that I was just a passing phase for him. Up until that moment, I had always shown her respect, but I also knew I needed to assert myself. I firmly told her that she could not speak to me in such a disrespectful manner again. I reminded her that I was not just James' girlfriend anymore, I was going to be his wife, her daughter-in-law. I acknowledged her disapproval but emphasized that I genuinely loved her son and believed we were good for each other. I made it clear that my past was not my fault, but I was actively working to create a better future for myself, and I hoped for her support. In response, she scoffed and declared that I would never have her blessings. Without missing a beat, I calmly replied that I was never asking for them and walked away. She later complained to James after the party about how disrespectful I was towards her, and my fiancé told her that she deserved it since she was always rude to me. It was satisfying watching her face go red in embarrassment. Dean later escorted her out as she yelled at James and me for rushing into getting married and cursing us out basically. Apart from this incident, our court marriage went quite smoothly. We moved to Cali and lived together in an apartment on rent. Our working hours were long, but every night we would make sure to spend time together as much as possible. I never thought marriage could be so easy, but I guess when you are with the right person, you don't have to try so hard. James and I had discussed our future and we were clear that we wanted children only after we were financially stable enough to start a family. Hence, in the 4th year of our marriage, when we finally moved into our own place after years of working hard, we both agreed that we could finally start trying for a baby. This house was a result of both our sweat and tears, and we were beyond thrilled at the prospect of welcoming a child into our lives and nurturing them in this space we had built together. Throughout all the years, Martha had hardly visited us, although Dean would regularly call or text us. Clearly, Martha was still holding a grudge, but everything changed when I finally got pregnant. As soon as she found out the news, she called James to demand that she should move in with us in the final months of my pregnancy so she could take care of her grandchild, and that she should also be allowed into my delivery room so she could supervise. Both James and I refused all her demands, and James even told her how crazy she was to even ask us for this, which set off yet another fight between them. Martha kept saying how this is what grandparents do for their grandchildren, and that if I was a good mother then I should let her at least watch her grandchild be born in the delivery room. Suffice it to say, my husband handled his crazy mother and she was not allowed to visit until our son turned 5 weeks old. During this time, I had taken maternity leave while James still worked. However, he would come back every night and do bath time with our son and put him to sleep. We both were tired, but at the same time being a parent gives you so much happiness. All the love and attention I never received as a child made me a good mother, and I thought I was doing an overall good job. However, when Martha came to visit, her opinion was different. She had complaints about everything, starting with why I was still breastfeeding, why the baby slept separately in the nursery and not with me in the bed, and why I didn't dress my son up this way or that way, which were overall just petty things to point out. She insisted on staying with us for a few weeks, and those weeks were one of the miserable times of my life. She would argue with me about everything and even insisted on putting a baby cam in the nursery so she could keep tabs on the baby at all times. I was exhausted during this time, so I didn't have the energy to argue with her much. However, things quickly worsened over the days when Martha did absolutely nothing to help me around the house. She would not even lift her hands to wash the dishes or fold the laundry. If I was tending to my crying baby and asked her for help with a dish that was being cooked in the kitchen, she would loudly say how nobody helped her when she was raising James and that I needed to do things all on my own. Her presence added an extra burden on me, as now I had one more mouth to feed, and she also had issues with my cooking style, as she felt cooking just 1 or 2 dishes was not enough to feed her son. I told James that I had had enough and he asked Martha to leave the very next day, which offended her deeply. She yelled at him about how she deserved to spend time with her grandson and that we could not keep her away from him. When James pointed out that she never even lifted a finger to help me around the house, which is what loved ones generally do when they are visiting new parents, Martha complained that I was being a lousy mother who was not working hard enough around the house, which is why she wanted to teach me a lesson. Suffice it to say, that James kicked her out of the house the very next day despite her protests. After Dean picked her up, she did send me multiple text messages saying how I was the reason for all the discord in her family, and in one of the messages she even wished that I should have died while giving birth. Her anger and hatred towards me were so strong that James and I discussed and agreed that we needed to go no contact with her immediately. We let Dean know about our intention and he surprisingly understood. This is why I haven't been in touch with my mill for the past 4 months and I thought it would remain this way. However, my life turned upside down when I got a call from the hospital saying that my husband had gotten into an accident while riding his bike. At first, my brain didn't work and I refused to believe that the call was about James. I remember collapsing onto the floor while holding my son and I felt my body go numb. I knew I needed to go to the hospital, so I called one of my coworkers to come over and watch my son and she thankfully agreed. I won't go into the details about how I felt when I saw my husband's lifeless body in the morgue, but I did faint because of the excruciating heartbreak. The most painful call I had to make right after identifying his body was to Martha to inform her of her son's death. Her blood-curdling cries of pain still ring in my ears. After finding out the news, my friends and James' relatives rushed over to California as soon as they could to be there for me and my son. We had to organize a funeral which thankfully my friends took charge of as I was in no state of mind to do anything. I agreed, and we stepped out into the backyard. Initially, she expressed her condolences, mentioning how she understood the pain of losing a husband and expressing her wish that I didn't have to endure such grief. However, her tone quickly shifted as she went on to suggest that I was not in the right state of mind to care for my son properly during such a vulnerable time. She boldly proposed that I should allow her to take my son with her so she could raise him away from all the grief and depression surrounding us. I was utterly taken aback, staring at her in disbelief as she continued to justify her proposal by saying that if I was really a good mother then I should not be selfish enough to hold on to her grandson at such a difficult time. I don't know what came over me, but all the years of pent-up anger and resentment just came flooding out and I screamed at her to get out of my house. My voice echoed so loudly that guests inside the house turned their heads in concern. My friends rushed to my side, and as I recounted Martha's outrageous demand, they looked at her with a mix of horror and disgust. Martha began to yell back at me, but my friends intervened, firmly escorting her out of the house. They insisted that her behavior toward me was far from normal and urged her to seek professional help. When others found out, they all agreed that maybe Martha was having a mental breakdown after losing her son and that I should just ignore her demands. They all agreed that I should not let her in and because the house belonged to me now anyway. That night, I kissed my son goodnight and went to bed still reeling from the grief of losing my husband and shock from his mother's absurd demand. Imagine my shock when I woke up the next day to find my son missing from his crib. I called the police while frantically turning the house upside down in search of my son. It was only when officers arrived at the house and questioned me if I knew someone who could have taken my son while I was sleeping, it clicked this had to be Martha's doing. She was the only one who had our spare house key which we had given her years ago in case of an emergency. I recounted the disturbing encounter from the previous day, detailing her shocking demand to take my son. Without hesitation, the officers sprang into action, dispatching a team to Martha's address. To my immense relief, they found my son there unharmed. However, Martha was swiftly charged and arrested for kidnapping and trespassing. She kept insisting to the officers that it was just a little prank and that she had every right to spend time with her grandson. As you can imagine, this news has since gone viral and people who know me have been calling me in shock. My friends and family recognize Martha from the news and they can't believe she had the audacity to actually kidnap my son. Although a majority of them agreed that it was right for me to press charges, some of Martha's relatives and her husband Dean believe that Martha is going through a tough time so I should just let this slide. Dean has even promised that he would admit her into a psychiatric hospital so she can get well. So Reddit, Ida for filing charges on my mill for taking away my son? Should I let it slide because she has just lost her own son and is probably grieving in her own way? Update 1. I am glad that the majority of people believe that I should not forgive her and that she might not calm down from this incident. I did feel a bit guilty initially when I posted this, but I agree with what most of you have commented that even my husband James would have supported my decision to charge her. That's exactly what I fear, which is why I have no choice but to pursue this. Although I don't want to punish her, I do think that she needs to learn the consequences of her actions, otherwise she might do it again to me and my son. As for the relatives who thought that I should just let this slide, I have decided that I am just going to ignore them and even block them because they never had to go through what I went through as I woke up that morning to find my son missing. Currently, I am working on hiring a lawyer who can help fight this case and present my side of the story effectively to a judge. We'll update soon. Update 2. Hey! I know it has been a month, but I was wrapped up in a lot of things. First of all, I have listened to everyone's advice and I have changed all the locks in my house. I have also installed a camera on my doorstep and backyard just in case. I did find a lawyer who helped me and my son get a restraining order against Martha for life so she can never ever come near us. I will admit that this has helped me feel a lot better and I feel more safe now. My lawyer is confident that we are going to win this case as the facts are pretty much clear, however it does give me a lot of anxiety. I will update if and when this case gets resolved. Update 3, as promised, I am finally updating y'all about the ongoing case I had against my mill who tried to kidnap my son. These last 7 months have been exhausting, but it seems to have finally paid off. Without going into much detail for legal reasons, my mill has been sentenced to jail for 3 years as was already expected. She and her lawyer tried their best to come up with a sob story about how she only had good intentions and was being playful, but thankfully the judge saw through all that crap and didn't let her actions slide that easily. It also helped that my lawyer showed the judge all the previous text messages that Martha had sent me over the years, which also included the text where she wished that I was dead. Not even once did Martha even glance at me or apologize even when the judge asked her if she wanted to say something to me before the sentencing. It just makes me glad that I decided to pursue the case against her. At least now me and my son can sleep at night peacefully.